A glass bottle violently shatters against the floor next to a collapsed figure's resting hand. Bitter tears stream down the exhausted woman's face as she stares upward in total despair. She weakly chokes out a desperate, heartbroken plea for her father. With her last ounce of strength, she begs him to help her. A harsh voice coldly commands her never to call him her father. He ruthlessly denounces her as nothing more than despicable scum. The dark-haired man gently comforts a smiling Liliza while the broken woman weeps on the floor. The abandoned woman stares in shocked betrayal as he promises to protect Liliza instead. Young Samara snaps out of her daze when a voice demands to know what is wrong. The imposing cloaked man asks if she has something to tell him regarding the sudden footage. Gazing at the man's familiar face, she recognizes him in disbelief as D. A sudden realization strikes Samara like a bolt of lightning. Panic sets in as she pieces together that if this man is D, she must be his daughter Samara. She desperately grasps the horrifying truth that she has reincarnated into the world of lovers in the Magic Kingdom. The magical world belongs to her past obsession, the popular Otome game commonly known as Mahokoi. Remembering the game's mechanics, she recalls playing as the heroine Liliza to romance targets like Prince Hopron and Crown Prince Ballin. Her mind flashes to the beautiful 25-year-old priest Shabalin. She envisions the rugged 33-year-old swordsman Kaleo. The memories lock onto the formidable 36-year-old demon Duke D. She shudders at the fact that D. Lise Arizult is the only romance target with an extreme age gap and a child. To her absolute horror, she realizes that D's child is destined to become the story's villainess, Samara Lise Arizult. In her past life as an ordinary 25-year-old office worker, she was hopelessly obsessed with this vibrant game world. Despite playing hundreds of titles, lovers in the Magic Kingdom fueled her passion like no other. Her fatal mistake was dozing off in front of a speeding truck while rushing home to play Mahokoi. Staring down at her tiny shoes, the weight of her new reality finally sinks in. The cold and imposing gaze of her new father stares down at her in deafening silence. She mentally screams in panic as she accepts her reincarnation as an Otome game villainess instead of an ordinary girl. A terrifying epiphany widens her youthful eyes as the dire consequences of her new identity dawn on her. Memories of the villainess's bratty misdeeds, from torturing cats to throwing tantrums over dresses, flood her mind. A dark realization creeps into her mind regarding Samara's inescapable ultimate fate. She remembers in sheer terror that Samara is doomed to die at 16 regardless of the chosen route. The villainess's tragic destiny always ends with her being caught and killed in the demon's violent rampage. Desperate to avoid a hated life and gruesome death, she frantically resolves to stop being mean and live obediently. Her tiny fists tightly grip the fabric of her skirt as she braces herself for survival. She furiously vows to be a calm, kind, and sensible girl because she absolutely refuses to die. Clenching her resolve, her entire being focuses on the singular, desperate goal of surviving. Above her, Demon Duke D looks down with an unreadable, piercing expression etched onto his aristocratic features. Standing before the black-haired, golden-eyed Duke, she realizes this marks their first reunion in 5 years since she was a baby. The bitter truth is that Samara is not biologically related to D, inheriting carrot-colored hair and grass-green eyes from his ex-wife Narnia. Meanwhile, a devastated D had desperately struggled with his conflicting feelings to believe his beloved wife, who was deeply entangled with her childhood friend. The tragic truth reveals that D's ex-wife completely vanished with her childhood friend. Deeply loving her with all his heart, a devastated D was left terribly hurt and drowning in profound despair. The heartbreak shattered his spirit, driving him to develop extremely antisocial tendencies and violently avoid all human interaction. This tragic, chilling isolation coldly extended to the infant Samara, leaving her utterly alone. Turning his back on his home, D left the 3-month-old baby at his sprawling estate and fled to the capital for work. Consumed by his lingering pain, the grieving Duke stubbornly refused to return home for 5 long years. Though he logically knew children were entirely innocent in such harsh betrayals, the pain still kept him far away. A shadowy image of his smiling ex-wife fiercely haunts his mind, cementing his deep reluctance to face his supposed daughter. He completely avoided Samara out of a terrifying dread that she would grow up to heavily resemble her mother. To fiercely compensate for his agonizing guilt, he foolishly instructed his staff to spoil the young girl to the absolute extreme. Feeling completely abandoned by her parents, her neglected personality drastically warped as she grew increasingly selfish. The bloodless daughter morphed into a lazy, jealous child who viciously rejoiced in the misfortune of others. Witnessing this terrible behavior, Dee's subtle distaste transformed into genuine dislike, causing him to distance himself even further. According to the game's strict lore, the aloof Duke only returned to the estate a single time before she turned 16. A massive realization violently strikes the reincarnated girl that this very day is that one fated visit. Absolute panic courses through her veins as she realizes missing this singular chance means not seeing him for 11 years. Gathering every ounce of her newly found courage, she gracefully steps forward and elegantly bows before the intimidating Duke. With absolute perfection, the tiny girl warmly welcomes her father home and earnestly thanks him for his hard work. The surrounding servants stare in utter, jaw-dropping silence at the unbelievably polite display from the notoriously bratty child. A stunned maid nervously sweats while trying to wildly process the miraculous transformation of their usually terrible young lady. The massive shock stems from the well-known fact that Samara violently skipped even the most basic etiquette lessons. Desperate to survive her doomed fate, Samara fiercely resolves to maintain this perfect noble facade to finally win Dee's elusive favor. The whispering staff marvel at her incredible humility, noting how extremely rare it is for a 5-year-old to greet someone so flawlessly. A tall, cheerful man suddenly interrupts the tense silence, happily praising Lady Samara for her wonderful manners. Samara's green eyes widen in sheer astonishment as she instantly recognizes the handsome, scarred swordsman as Kaleo. She mentally screams in pure excitement upon realizing that Dee's loyal friend is also one of the game's primary romance targets. Her sharp survival instincts dramatically flare up as she recognizes a golden opportunity to heavily win over the powerful swordsman. Flashing a bright, innocent smile, she politely addresses him by name to firmly establish a highly favorable impression. With flawless aristocratic grace, she formally introduces herself as the respectful eldest daughter of the Arizult family. Acting the part of a perfect host, she sweetly urges the honored guest to relax and deeply enjoy his stay. A completely charmed Kaleo excitedly gushes over her absolute cuteness, heavily impressed by her playing the perfect little lady of the house. A stern-faced Dee immediately commands his nervous staff to heavily prepare hot tea in the grand living room. The loyal servants instantly scramble to obey his firm orders to swiftly serve the honored guests until dinner time. A respectful butler smoothly informs the Duke that tonight's grand main dish will be a delicious, hearty duck stew. Completely bewildered by his daughter's bizarrely perfect behavior, Dee glares suspiciously at the rapidly unfolding scene. A grinning Kaleo confidently declares that the butler's previously dire written reports about her awful behavior were wildly wrong. He cheerfully insists that the deeply concerned staff clearly exaggerated their harsh complaints about the supposedly wicked young girl. Gesturing to the sweet child, Kaleo fiercely argues that someone so flawlessly polite and incredibly adorable couldn't possibly be a monster. Gently pushing the hesitant Duke forward, Kaleo warmly insists that a long-awaited parent-child reunion absolutely requires a hug. The stoic Dee stares down intensely at the tiny, expectant girl as the heavy silence fiercely thickens in the grand hallway. The tiny girl tightly embraces the towering legs of her intimidating dark-haired father. The formidable demon Duke stares down at the small child in stunning disbelief. A heavy realization strikes her about the crushing emotional loneliness the original Samara silently carried. Looking up with tearful sincerity, she warmly welcomes her father home and whispers how much she deeply missed him. His gloved hand trembles slightly in the air as he awkwardly hesitates to return his daughter's sudden affection. Frantically scribbling in her notebook, she wildly prepares desperate survival countermeasures before dinner officially begins. Analyzing her father's character traits, she notes he strongly favors honest people who refuse to cower in fear. She recalls that because his immense magic terrifies everyone, the only person he genuinely trusts is his loyal friend Kaleo. Remembering the game's strict lore, she realizes Dee deeply admires ambitious individuals who work incredibly hard. She furiously underlines the critical fact that sincere actions serve as the absolute key to winning his frozen heart. Knowing Dee reigns as the continent's greatest mage, she understands that mastering powerful magic remains utterly crucial. A spark of fierce determination ignites as she forcefully resolves to become a prestigious court magician. Her heart drastically sinks as she dreads crossing paths with Liliza at the Barilrose Kingdom's Royal Magic Research Institute. The brilliant heroine Liliza effortlessly shines at the elite academy with her widely recognized magical talent. Samara heavily groans at the miserable reality that her own character lacks any real magic and enters entirely through nepotism. Accepting the harsh truth, she strategically acknowledges that enrolling in the institute prevents her from being dismissed as a weak amateur. Since vicious monsters freely roam this world, she fiercely concludes that learning combat magic directly guarantees her physical survival. Pinning her ultimate goal to the wall, she boldly declares her unyielding intention to show absolute sincerity through relentless action. She strictly commands herself to actively avoid bullying Liliza and carefully maintain a kind distance if they ever meet. Pumping her tiny fist high into the air, she passionately commits every ounce of her spirit to this newly forged survival strategy. Staring proudly at her heavily pinned corkboard, a massive wave of defiant confidence suddenly washes over her. A polite maid abruptly interrupts her intensely focused planning to announce that the grand dinner stands completely ready. Grunting with heavy effort, the small child awkwardly struggles to safely climb down from her massive wooden desk chair. A sudden memory sharply flashes through her mind regarding a deeply hidden sixth romance target in the original Otome game. Frustration bitterly grips her as she angrily recalls totally failing to unlock his elusive appearance conditions. She sighs heavily while remembering how she obsessively theorized about that secret character right up to her tragic, untimely death. Shaking off the lingering regret of missing that exclusive romance, she forcefully refocuses entirely on her immediate, dangerous reality. Pausing alone in the dimly lit hallway, the sheer crushing gravity of her bizarre reincarnation fully sets in. She stares intensely into a large ornate mirror directly at the glowing reflection of the doomed, green-eyed Villainess. Gently touching her own soft cheek in utter disbelief, she fully internalizes the undeniable physical truth of her new identity. Admiring the incredibly luxurious fabric of her aristocratic dress, she completely accepts her new privileged life as Samara. Clenching her tiny fists with burning resolve, she vows to play the good girl and successfully win over the powerful Dee and Kaleo. The attentive maid gently bows and politely hurries the young noble lady toward the estate's grand dining hall. Dashing quickly down the carpeted corridor, she fiercely promises herself to expertly dodge every single looming death flag. A wave of profound emotional relief warmly floods her chest as she successfully navigates her terrifying first major hurdle. She happily realizes the comforting taste of this kingdom's food perfectly matches the delicious flavors she enjoyed before she reincarnated. Sitting enthusiastically at the massive dining table, she warmly praises the spectacular, savory meal to her completely silent father. The emotionless Duke coldly dismisses his daughter's cheerful compliment by bluntly stating he possesses absolutely no culinary preferences. A massive sweat drop nervously rolls down her forehead as she internally screams at his brutally freezing response to a small innocent child. Watching the awkward dynamic unfold, she astutely deduces that her father's spectacularly icy parenting ultimately forged the original Samara's awful personality. Clenching her tiny fists, Samara brightly declares she will try her absolute best to eat the detested eel jelly alongside her stoic father. She suddenly flinches and nervously apologizes while visibly sweating under the crushing, heavy silence. Kaleo smoothly intervenes to reassure the young lady, revealing that both he and his excellency secretly despise the slippery dish. Samara gasps in utter shock, while a flustered Dee stubbornly barks that he absolutely does not dislike the meal. The proud Duke awkwardly averts his golden eyes, defensively grumbling that the dish simply fails to go down well on certain days. A massive smile stretches across the young girl's face as she excitedly uncovers exclusive new lore completely missing from her precious fanbooks. Pumping her fists with explosive energy, she loudly vows to work incredibly hard so her father can eventually enjoy the meal. Dee stares down silently at his tiny, fiercely determined daughter with a completely unreadable expression etched onto his face. He abruptly lets out a cold, dismissive grunt while dramatically turning his heavy black cape away from the table. The heavy wooden dining room doors slam shut with a violent crash as the towering Duke makes an unexpected, rapid exit. Absolute panic violently seizes the trembling girl as she visibly despairs over potentially destroying his incredibly fragile pride. A warm, heavily scarred hand gently pats her shaking head to immediately ground her rapidly spiraling panic. Flashing a comforting smile, Kaleo warmly promises that the intimidating Duke is merely acting shy rather than harboring genuine anger. Tilting her head curiously, Samara eagerly asks the loyal knight if he knows extensive, hidden details about her mysterious father. The proud swordsman confidently confirms their unbreakable bond, reminiscing about the dangerous times they traveled and risked their lives together. Samara stares up at him with sparkling, awestruck eyes, completely captivated by the intense loyalty of their incredible brotherhood. She desperately begs the grinning knight to reveal everything her father likes so she can rapidly bridge their massive 5-year gap. Kaleo gently shakes his head, warmly advising the eager girl to ask His Excellency directly since they belong to the same true family. He gently taps her tiny chest with his index finger to physically emphasize the profound emotional weight of his sincere advice. Kneeling down, he softly reminds her that all her heavily piled-up words truly belong to her father on this long-awaited reunion day. The young girl completely freezes, letting his profound, heartfelt wisdom visibly wash over her anxious posture. Radiating absolute warmth, Kaleo confidently assures her that the silent duke deeply desires to speak with his estranged daughter too. Samara dramatically clutches her chest, visibly overwhelmed by the devastatingly handsome charm radiating from the smiling swordsman. Fired up by his encouragement, she loudly thanks Lord Kaleo and boldly promises to chase after her father immediately. She resolutely marches her tiny boots down the grand, dimly lit corridors of the massive aristocratic estate. Despite the knight's warm reassurances, a heavy shadow of doubt visibly clouds her face as she recalls Dee's freezing demeanor. She cautiously approaches the towering wooden doors of the duke's private study while holding her bated breath. Peeking nervously through the thick doorway, she formally announces her presence and politely asks for permission to enter. A deep, gruff voice immediately commands her to enter, prompting the tiny girl to carefully step into the intimidating room. She slowly approaches the massive oak desk where the dark-haired duke works in deafening, absolute silence. Dee sharply narrows his piercing golden eyes and coldly demands to know her exact reason for intruding on his workspace. Hoisting a small silver tray, she cheerfully explains that she brought his abandoned dessert so they could share it together. She proudly presents the wobbly blackberry jelly, brightly declaring how incredibly delicious the dark treat looks in the candlelight. The imposing duke glares blankly at the wiggling dessert without offering a single outward word of gratitude or interest. Frantic panic violently grips the visibly sweating girl as she clearly assumes her stoic father secretly despises blackberries too. Scrambling to break the crushing silence, she loudly blurts out that she specifically offered sparkling blackberry wine to the fairies beforehand. Dee softly murmurs a brief acknowledgement, causing his fiercely stoic expression to visibly soften by a microscopic fraction. Samara's bright green eyes widen to impossible proportions as she distinctly catches the tiny, miraculous improvement in his freezing mood. A sudden, lightning-fast realization visibly flashes across her face regarding the strict magical lore of the kingdom's fairies. She gasps with absolute clarity, realizing he previously judged her for rudely eating without properly honoring the fairy spirits first. In this mystical world, the chaotic forces of magic and mischievous fairies remain permanently intertwined. Magical power directly equates to the strength needed to interact with fairies, as all spells activate by channeling the elemental forces of fire, water, wind, and earth. Since the great magician Dee commands immense magical power, every single servant working within his grand mansion is secretly one of his summoned fairy familiars. The dark, juicy blackberries offered on the silver tray serve as a highly beloved treat among the mischievous fairies. Samara internally rejoices at her earlier offering, knowing it is customary around the autumn equinox to gift blackberry wine or pies to Mab, the fairy of dreams and illusions. Remembering that treating magic carelessly is one of Dee's strict taboos, Samara nervously changes the subject to ask what kind of food he eats at the royal palace. The imposing duke slightly widens his golden eyes, momentarily taken aback by his tiny daughter's sudden, innocent curiosity. He brutally shuts down her attempt at conversation, coldly stating that knowing his dietary habits holds absolutely no meaning or benefit for her. Desperately trying to connect, she loudly insists she wants to learn everything about him since they live together, internally screaming at his terrible parenting. His impossibly harsh, repetitive rejection echoes heavily in the tense room, completely freezing her desperate attempts to bridge their massive emotional gap. Remembering Kaleo's warm assurance that her father wanted to speak with her, a deeply disheartened Samara awkwardly apologizes to the silent duke. Refusing to entirely give up, the determined girl quickly changes her approach to cheerfully ask about his prestigious magical duties at the palace. When the stoic duke suspiciously questions her sudden interest, she boldly declares her burning ambition to work at the Royal Magic Research Institute someday. Dee sharply snaps his full attention back to the tiny girl, demanding she repeat her outrageous statement with a completely stunned expression. Gripping her dress, she proudly states her intense desire to honor the Arizult family by officially receiving the prestigious Lu title just like him. She rapidly recalls the kingdom's strict lore, noting that Sia denotes nobility while Lu specifically marks a highly respected magic noble or magus. This complex royal naming convention proudly merges into his full, intimidating official title of D. Lucia Arizult. Though the young girl temporarily holds both titles, she will permanently lose her magic status unless she earns strict state approval before reaching adulthood. Confronting his accurate assumption that she hasn't studied magic, she tightly grasps his cape and honestly admits that meeting him changed her mind. After she tearfully vows to become a proper magician, the imposing Duke coldly permits her to do as she likes without offering a shred of support. Raising a silver teacup to his lips, he harshly warns her that mastering incredible magical arts is absolutely not something achieved on a fleeting whim. He brutally scolds her past laziness, sternly stating that powerful fairies will never lend their strength to someone who has completely ignored their magical encyclopedias. Sweating profusely, Samara realizes he thinks she views magic as a massive joke, prompting her to violently nod and promise to be extremely careful. Gathering every ounce of her fleeting courage, she loudly interrupts the awkward silence to beg him for direct, personal magical lessons. Her desperate plea hangs heavy in the dimly lit study as she stares up at him with massive, pleading green eyes. Internally panicking, she realizes she accidentally stole the exact iconic line the original heroine Liliza used to romance the Dark Duke. Without a single second of hesitation, the ruthless Duke completely shatters her hopes with a devastatingly cold and immediate refusal. Glaring down at his trembling daughter, he cruelly asks if the estate's incompetent butler forgot to inform her of his urgent schedule. Samara gasps in utter shock as he bluntly reveals he is completely abandoning the estate tomorrow morning to return to the bustling capital. The devastating news hits the tiny girl like a physical blow, leaving her completely frozen and visibly heartbroken on the rich carpet. Tears prick her emerald eyes as she weakly stammers that she genuinely expected him to stay longer, completely overwhelmed by her crushing loneliness. Utterly defeated, she bitterly concludes that clearing Dee's impossible romance route is entirely hopeless as he firmly calls out her name. To her absolute astonishment, the towering Duke steps forward and gently places his large, gloved hand atop her vibrant carrot-colored hair. Confused by his sudden warmth, the young girl quietly obeys his soft, mysterious command to tightly shut her tear-filled eyes. Channeling a strange, ethereal energy, he firmly instructs her to keep her breathing perfectly calm and attempt to open her eyes beneath her closed lids. She whines that the bizarre magical exercise feels impossibly difficult, while he patiently urges her to execute the movement slowly and naturally. Following his calm guidance, she vividly visualizes peeling back a secondary layer of sight while keeping her physical body completely still. A breathtaking gasp escapes her tiny lips as an entirely new, glowing dimension violently explodes into her previously dark vision. Millions of beautiful, glowing fairy lights wildly dance across the massive room, totally illuminating the magical space in a spectacular display of energy. Dee solemnly explains that ordinary humans entirely lack the power to perceive this stunning, eternal realm where the magical fairies truly reside. The imposing Duke gently cradles his daughter, revealing that powerful magicians permanently connect the eternal fairy realm to the human world. Staring out into the dazzling lights, Samara realizes that grasping this magical truth is the very first step to mastering the arcane arts. Her glowing green eyes widen in pure awe as she fully comprehends the breathtaking reality of the magician's hidden world. Mischievous fairies eagerly swarm the young girl, harshly mocking her lack of respect and exposing her sudden, fake good behavior. The tiny spirits viciously claim she only offered wine to Mab on a fleeting whim because her father finally returned home. Absolute panic violently seizes Samara as she frantically prays the towering Duke cannot hear the fairies exposing her terrible past. A massive wave of relief washes over her when she realizes Dee stands completely silent, entirely deaf to the fairies' merciless gossip. Standing alone in her dark room, she stares at her tingling hand, still entirely overwhelmed by the fluffy, surreal magical experience. The next morning, she happily bounds to the window and cheerfully greets the floating, translucent wind fairies. The bratty wind fairies immediately burst into cruel laughter, viciously refusing to speak to the girl while mocking her pitiful magic. Flipping through her mental encyclopedia, she recalls that wind fairies are notorious pranksters, while flower fairies eagerly crave superficial compliments. Nervously approaching a vibrant garden bush, the tiny girl gently stammers a polite greeting to a glowing little spirit. She brightly compliments the heath fairy's gorgeous purple dress, prompting the delighted spirit to happily return the sweet praise. A brilliant explosion of sparkling fairy dust showers the air as the ecstatic spirit twirls gracefully in the lush garden. Pure joy radiantly illuminates Samara's face as the beautiful magical creature completely accepts her warm, genuine friendship. Dozens of cheerful flower fairies swarm the delighted girl, decorating her hair with glowing blooms and eagerly demanding a dance. Bathed in the ethereal glow of the full moon, she completely surrenders to the fairies' infectious, magical rhythm. She spins wildly through the overgrown foliage, her vibrant hair trailing behind her in a spectacular display of unbridled joy. A warm, blissful smile stretches across her face as she gleefully embraces the surreal, dreamlike fantasy unfolding around her. Dee's massive silhouette suddenly emerges from the shadows, flatly stating she completely exhausted her mana by foolishly overdoing the dance. Bright morning sunlight warmly floods the lavish bedroom as cheerful birds chirp violently outside the grand arched windows. Waking up in sheer panic, she gasps as a maid softly explains that His Excellency gently carried her exhausted body to bed. Throwing off her heavy blankets, she frantically commands the startled maid to help her dress immediately. Her tiny boots violently pound against the rich carpet as she wildly sprints down the massive, seemingly endless estate corridors. Desperation fiercely fuels her sprint as she vividly realizes she only has a few fleeting hours left before Dee abandons the estate. She fiercely resolves to properly express her deep gratitude before her father vanishes back to the distant royal capital. Her mind races with profound thankfulness for his magical lessons, their quiet talks, and his unexpected, gentle care. A heartwarming memory of his stiff but meaningful welcome home embrace violently pushes her tiny legs to run even faster. Spotting the dark-haired Duke fully dressed for travel, she desperately screams out to her father across the grand foyer. Dee and Kaleo immediately halt their departure, turning to face the tiny girl panting heavily against the giant wooden doors. The stoic Duke peers down at her frantic form, calmly demanding to know why she rushed over in such a reckless hurry. Gasping desperately for air, she nervously clenches her tiny fists while struggling to find her chaotic, jumbled words. Heavy tears well in her vivid green eyes as she emotionally thanks him for the magical night and for gently carrying her to bed. Overcome with raw emotion, she loudly pours out her deeply buried gratitude for every single moment they shared. Tears violently stream down her flushed cheeks as she practically begs him to answer her future letters and return to her someday. She desperately pleads with the imposing Duke to never forget his lonely daughter during his long absence. A visibly stunned Dee stares down at his fiercely weeping daughter, his piercing golden eyes widening in genuine, raw surprise. Gently placing a heavily gloved hand atop her trembling head, he softly remarks that she certainly cries an awful lot. Kaleo chuckles warmly at the incredibly touching scene, immediately earning a harsh, aggressively embarrassed glare from the blushing Duke. To her absolute, world-shattering shock, the flustered Duke suddenly grumbles that he decided to extend his stay for an entire month. Teary-eyed but determined, Samara clung to her father, declaring she wasn't leaving today and insisting she didn't lie. Overwhelmed with joy, Samara cheered enthusiastically to celebrate that she finally got to stay with her father. Looking up with wide, tear-filled eyes, she felt a gentle hand warmly patting her head. Looking down with a gentle smile, Dee affectionately apologized for his daughter being such a handful. As someone warmly congratulated the happy girl, Samara confirmed that Lord Kaleo was staying too. The blonde-haired Kaleo patted her head, asking her to talk a lot with him, to which Samara eagerly agreed. Embracing Dee, Samara declared herself the happiest person in the world while noting that the fairies wanted to play with him again. Dee looked at her intently, promising to help if she could learn to enter the eternal realm by herself. Samara hugged him tightly, letting out a soft sigh of contentment as she rested securely against his chest. Smiling with pure joy, she told her father she loved him, realizing her new life with Dee was finally beginning. The narrative perspective shifted smoothly to recount a forgotten tale from long ago. Many people on the Meiser continent possessed magic and lived alongside fairies until advancing culture caused humanity to gradually lose respect for them. Fewer magic-wielding humans were born, and those with mysterious powers eventually became persecuted as heretics. However, everything drastically changed about 200 years ago in continental year 1800. Samara looked up in awe, fully absorbing the gravity of this ancient, world-altering history. The boundary between worlds blurred, allowing ordinary humans to see everworld creatures like dragons and giants, which humanity feared as monsters. The horrific situation escalated further as powerful magical beings began physically interfering with the real world. Stepping out from the shadows of persecution, magicians used their remarkable power to repel the invading monsters. These magical saviors were quickly treasured in every nation, becoming heroes of the continent who were sometimes honored even more than kings. The historical recount transitioned seamlessly back to the present day in the 2000s of continental history. In most countries of the Meiser continent, royal family magicians were granted the prestigious noble rank of Mage Marquis, sitting above a standard Marquis. Samara recalled that 7 years ago, Dee alone received the unparalleled, unique title of Mage Duke in the entire continent. 7 years ago, a massive threat emerged when a gigantic dragon appeared in the outskirts of the Barilrose Kingdom. Dee headed out with Kaleo to slay the beast, and through sheer determination, they succeeded. The battle took many lives but ended when Dee used a forbidden spell, solidifying his legacy as a true savior of humanity. Samara reflected on these dramatic events, realizing this was exactly what was written in Chapter 2 of the fanbook. Her expression shifted into one of fierce determination as she gathered her thoughts and made a firm decision. Closing her notebook with a soft thud, she eagerly decided it was time to go see her father. Running excitedly down the hallway, she quickly apologized without breaking her stride as a maid gently scolded her to slow down. Realizing her mistake, she transitioned into a swift, comical tiptoeing walk to behave herself while still rushing forward. She pulled open a door, quietly wondering to herself where Dee could possibly be hiding. Peeking carefully through the doorway, her eyes scanned the bright surroundings for any sign of him. Someone kindly informed her that he was currently in the eastern garden near the oak mistletoe. Her face lit up with immediate gratitude as she cheerfully thanked the informant before rushing off. Time gracefully passed, marking 2 full weeks since she had first started living there. She happily noted that her notebook was 70% filled, feeling that, little by little, she and her father were getting closer. Exploring the huge, treasure trove-like garden, she joyfully called out to her father as she approached. Dee stood silently in the garden, turning slightly at the sound of his daughter's voice. She rushed eagerly toward him and Kaleo, enjoying the perfect, peaceful garden setting under the bright sky. Samara suddenly stopped in shock, her eyes widening as she noticed a guest standing with them who seemed a little too familiar. Spotting her sudden arrival in the bright surroundings, the familiar guest warmly called out to Lady Samara. Looking down at her with a gentle expression, he politely asked if she had come wandering through the area looking for His Excellency. Taken completely aback by the sudden encounter, Samara stuttered slightly as she finally recognized Lord Kaleo's friendly face. Pivoting smoothly on his heel, Kaleo respectfully announced to His Excellency that Lady Samara had arrived to see him. Turning his attention warmly toward his daughter, Dee calmly acknowledged her presence and inquired if her academic lesson for the day was already finished. As Samara happily confirmed her demanding studies were complete, Kaleo playfully suggested that Dee should officially introduce the mysterious presence lingering nearby. Materializing beautifully before the young girl's eyes, a mystical figure noted just how clever Samara was for finally being able to see her. Caught completely off guard by the ethereal being's sudden appearance, Samara stared blankly forward in utter, wide-eyed confusion. Gently hovering near Samara with a tender smile, the radiant spirit warmly blessed the little cute one's future before gracefully fading away. Gasping in absolute awe, Samara suddenly realized that the breathtaking, translucent entity she just witnessed was the legendary mistletoe spirit. Gripping her dress nervously, she sheepishly admitted that she still struggled to clearly distinguish between the magical everworld and the real world. Confirming her observation, Dee calmly explained that he was actively seeking the spirit's blessing because he was preparing to head out. With a slightly wistful smile, Kaleo mentioned that while mistletoe spirits were renowned for their breathtaking beauty, he unfortunately lacked the magical ability to see them. Leaning in much closer with a mischievous glint in his eye, Kaleo playfully asked Lady Samara if she was perhaps feeling a little jealous. Completely flustered by the sudden, absurd accusation, Samara jerked back with a loud, defensive gasp of pure shock. As Dee sternly reprimanded Kaleo for speaking such nonsense to a child, Kaleo casually brushed it off by claiming it was simply common sense for little girls to despise anyone stealing their father's attention. Continuing his deeply teasing lecture, Kaleo dramatically declared that it was perfectly natural for young girls to burn with raging jealousy whenever their beloved father showed affection to another. Overwhelmed by absolute, undeniable embarrassment, Samara's face erupted into a vibrant, glowing blush as she stood paralyzed under Kaleo's relentless teasing. Pushing the cruel joke even further, Kaleo cheekily instructed His Excellency to reassure Samara by confidently declaring he loved her more than anyone else in the entire world. Flailing her arms wildly in fierce denial, the furiously blushing girl angrily yelled that she wasn't jealous at all and scolded Lord Kaleo for being so obnoxiously noisy. Quietly diffusing the highly chaotic situation, Dee affectionately reached out and gently patted his deeply flustered daughter's head. Instructing her to quickly fetch her hat, Dee warmly confirmed that she would be joining them as they immediately headed out into town. Overflowing with boundless, electric excitement at the prospect of finally going out with her father, Samara enthusiastically cheered and promised to get ready right away. Giggling with pure, unrestrained joy, the highly energetic young girl spun around and sprinted off down the sunlit garden path. Watching her fade rapidly into the distance, Dee softly remarked on her lively nature while Kaleo humorously sighed that proper ladies shouldn't be running. Arriving at their spectacular new destination, Samara gazed outward into the vast horizon and let out a breathtaking gasp of absolute wonder. Rushing eagerly toward the scenic overlook, she excitedly marveled at the stunning, sparkling expanse of the gorgeous blue ocean stretching before them. Stepping up quietly beside her, Kaleo warmly asked if she was enjoying the sea, wholly agreeing that the breathtaking view was truly wonderful. Staring longingly out at the crashing waves, Kaleo nostalgically revealed that growing up in a country surrounded by the sea made this beautiful sight feel exactly like home. Peering deeply into Kaleo's sudden melancholic expression, Samara silently recalled the highly hidden, tragic truth of his profoundly mysterious past. The world falsely believed the royal bloodline had tragically died out when a violent coup transformed the distant eastern Linpin kingdom into a republic, but Kaleo was actually a secret descendant of that very royal family. Mentally noting that this dark secret was originally only revealed to Liliza in Kaleo's specific romantic route, Samara cheerfully declared that while her father's territory was wonderful, a country filled with so much sea sounded absolutely amazing. Beaming upward with deeply innocent hope, Samara enthusiastically begged Lord Kaleo to take her to see his beautiful home country someday. Stunned speechless by her sudden, fiercely heartfelt request, Kaleo's eyes widened slightly before melting into a remarkably tender and affectionate smile as he gladly accepted. Kneeling gracefully before her small frame, he passionately promised to show Lady Samara everything his homeland had to offer, from ocean dolphins and desert camels to the breathtaking, star-filled sky. Gazing fiercely into her bright eyes, he firmly swore that when that distant, hopeful day finally arrived, he would certainly fulfill his heartfelt promise. Adding a very practical condition to their grand adventure, Kaleo warmly insisted that they would proudly travel there together just as soon as she was old enough to safely handle the journey. Mid-sentence, Kaleo suddenly realized they would absolutely need His Excellency's strict permission for such a long journey, abruptly pausing as a deeply chilling realization forcefully washed over him. Slowly turning their heads in utter, paralyzing dread, the two companions instantly felt the crushingly heavy, pitch-black aura of pure unhappiness aggressively radiating from directly behind them. Sweating nervously under her father's intensely jealous, burning glare, a deeply horrified Samara instantly realized they had completely left him out of their highly exciting conversation. Dee sternly granted Samara permission to go wherever she wanted as long as she didn't cause him any trouble. Looking up eagerly, Samara expressed her heartfelt desire to travel to a desert country someday alongside both Lord Kaleo and her father. Absorbing the exciting idea of a desert journey, Samara's mind immediately raced with thrilling thoughts of exploring unknown lands. Curious about the exotic animals, she eagerly asked her father if camels were like horses and begged to ride one with him. Dee sighed deeply at his foolish child's ignorance, bluntly promising to buy her an encyclopedia later so she could look it up herself. Educating her swiftly, he explained that a camel resembles a horse with a massive hump on its back and can easily carry two riders. Picturing the bizarre creature in her mind, she marveled at the fascinating idea of riding a massive beast with a hump on its back. Correcting her enthusiastic assumption about dolphins being fish, Dee smartly clarified that they are actually intelligent marine mammals devoid of scales. Bouncing with absolute excitement, Samara loudly praised her father as an amazing genius who knew everything about the world. Catching herself mid-cheer, She nervously wondered if her overly enthusiastic praise had perhaps been a little too much. Dismissing her wild flattery instantly, Dee firmly shut down the compliment by calling it complete nonsense. He coolly stated that if knowing such basic facts made someone a genius, then nearly everyone on the continent would be considered one. Following closely behind her father, she stubbornly kept pace as they continued walking down the bright path together. Despite his cold exterior, a faint hint of flustered annoyance betrayed Dee's hidden embarrassment at her relentless admiration. Smiling triumphantly to herself, Samara realized she had successfully learned how to handle Dee's prickly personality over the past 2 weeks. Suddenly stopping in his tracks, Dee casually handed her a strange object and instructed her to keep it securely in her pocket. Glancing down at the terrifying item resting in her palm, Samara let out a sharp shriek of pure horror. Annoyed by her dramatic reaction to the gift, Dee sternly commanded the panicked girl to instantly calm down. Explaining the bizarre item, he revealed that the creepy skull-like object was actually a snapdragon seed pod designed to protect her from calamity. Warning her of the city's unpredictable nature, he grimly noted that with so many people around, bad things could easily happen. Urging her to remain safe at all times, Dee insisted she keep the protective charm close to her. Gazing silently at the protective charm resting in her palm, a sudden wave of genuine warmth washed over her heart. Blushing deeply with genuine gratitude, she clutched the charm tightly and softly thanked her father for caring so much. Deflecting her heartfelt gratitude, Dee casually mumbled that regular flowers offered the exact same protective blessing anyway. Crossing his arms defensively, he stubbornly claimed that the creepy seed pods were simply the only things he could gather at the moment. Shuddering slightly as she slipped the skull-like pod into her pocket, she awkwardly wished it was spring so she could have received normal flowers instead. Discussing their current destination, Dee confirmed they were visiting a mineral shop since such rare materials couldn't just be picked from the manor's garden. Arriving at the busy location, Dee ordered Samara to explore the area safely with Kaleo while he handled business with the shopkeeper. Turning his sharp gaze toward his trusted companion, Dee firmly entrusted his daughter's absolute safety to Kaleo. Accepting the heavy responsibility with a bright smile, Kaleo cheerfully invited the young lady to go explore the bustling market together. Pointing excitedly at a fascinating stall, Samara gasped in wonder as Kaleo patiently explained how the foreign paint seller's colorful goods worked. Rapidly bombarding him with endless questions, she eagerly asked about everything from cushion sellers to vendors frying mashed fish in hot oil. Marveling at the vibrant sights and sounds, Samara happily compared the bustling bazaar to the fascinating foreign markets she had once seen on TV. Taking in the incredible diversity around her, she silently reflected on how this expansive, populated world had never fully appeared in the original game. Spotting a massive gathering of noisy people just ahead, her sharp curiosity was instantly piqued by the bizarre commotion. Driven by sheer excitement, she immediately suggested to Kaleo that they head over and see what the massive crowd was looking at. Eager to uncover the source of the commotion, the curious duo stepped toward the dense crowd to get a much closer look. Struggling to see past the tall onlookers, Samara strained her ears and heard a loud merchant shamelessly auctioning off a beautiful water spirit. The greedy vendor proudly declared he was throwing in a magical subjugation collar so even ordinary humans without magic could easily handle the creature. Frozen in absolute horror, Samara finally realized the sickening truth that these ruthless people were actively trapping and trading innocent fairies. The greedy merchant continued auctioning the beautiful water spirit, proudly waving a subjugation collar in the air. He loudly advertised that even ordinary people without magical ability could easily control the captive creature. Horrified by the cruel device, Samara realized the collar was explicitly designed to force absolute obedience through agonizing pain. She knew those barbaric collars were strictly meant for capturing dangerous monsters, not for enslaving innocent fairies. Kaleo quietly noted that while trading fairies might not be strictly illegal, it was undeniably sickening to witness. Unable to contain her burning outrage, Samara fiercely broke away and sprinted directly toward the merchant's crowded stall. She angrily confronted the man, demanding to know how he could commit such atrocities while constantly benefiting from fairy blessings. As Kaleo urgently called out to stop her, Samara fiercely interrogated the merchant about his own magical abilities. The startled merchant flinched backward in genuine shock as the small girl aggressively challenged his entire cruel operation. Pointing a furious finger at the greedy man, she desperately warned him about the severe consequences of his vile actions. She passionately declared that no matter how much magic he possessed, The fairies would permanently revoke their sacred power. Staring down at the fiercely shouting child, the merchant's initial shock quickly twisted into deep, threatening annoyance. The agitated man growled for her to mind her own business, falsely claiming his cruel trade was an act of kindness. Kaleo swiftly intervened, smoothly apologizing to the merchant while firmly warning Samara not to interfere with the business. Struggling fiercely against Kaleo's unyielding grip, Samara desperately cried out that they couldn't just abandon the suffering fairies. Kaleo grimly agreed it was sickening to watch but firmly reminded her that the merchant's disgusting actions were entirely legal. He strictly warned her that getting arrested for obstructing business would cause massive, unacceptable trouble for His Excellency. Refusing to back down, Samara stubbornly insisted the trade was morally wrong and that even D would be absolutely furious. Maintaining his calm composure, Kaleo gently but firmly suggested they leave the chaotic market immediately. Before they could take another step, a highly menacing voice coldly interrupted their quiet retreat. A massive thug blocked their path, aggressively asking if they thought they could just walk away after causing trouble. Surrounding the duo, the violent gang demanded a proper apology for blatantly disrupting their highly profitable fairy auction. Remaining perfectly still, Kaleo politely lowered his head and offered a calm, formal apology to the aggressive thugs. He smoothly took full responsibility for the misunderstanding, but his polite words only enraged the volatile gang further. The furious thug leaned in close, viciously snarling that a simple verbal apology would never be enough to settle the score. Drawing their dangerous weapons, the greedy thugs demanded the duo hand over all their money and fancy clothes immediately. Trembling with utter disbelief, Samara was deeply horrified to realize that such vile criminals existed within her father's territory. Catching her fierce, defiant glare, the lead thug sneered downward and mockingly questioned her angry expression. Branding her a cheeky brat, the violent man raised his massive hand to ruthlessly strike the defenseless child. The heavy, menacing hand swung down violently through the air directly toward Samara's terrified face. Suddenly, the thug let out a confused gasp as a blindingly fast blur intercepted his brutal attack mid-swing. Appearing instantly before the massive man, Kaleo coldly reiterated that the fault was entirely his own. Samara stared in absolute shock as Kaleo maintained a perfectly calm expression while delivering a devastatingly powerful kick. The violent impact sent the massive thug crashing backward as his furious comrades instantly charged forward to retaliate. Screaming in blind rage, the heavily armed goons swarmed the solitary swordsman with deadly intent. Moving with breathtaking speed, Kaleo effortlessly dodged their chaotic strikes as naked steel flashed brightly in the sunlight. In a fluid, masterful motion, Kaleo unleashed a blinding counterattack that completely shattered the gang's uncoordinated offensive. As the heavily beaten thugs collapsed onto the ground screaming in agony, Kaleo politely apologized once more. Sheathing his weapon flawlessly, he coldly informed the groaning men that he was strictly ordered to protect Lady Samara completely. The humiliated thugs cursed bitterly from the dirt, furious that a mere swordsman had effortlessly decimated their entire crew. Wide-eyed with sudden shock, Samara gasps as unforeseen danger rapidly approaches her. An unseen attacker ruthlessly commands the black goddess of winter and death to strike their enemies down. Shielding Samara from the erupting thorny vines, Lord Kaleo clicks his tongue in deep frustration. Gripped by fear, Samara desperately wishes she had studied magic sooner as Kaleo faces a severe disadvantage against the mage. Kaleo urgently leaps through the air to narrowly evade the relentless onslaught of deadly black thorns. As they crash hard to the ground, a frantic voice screams out for Lady Samara's safety. A massive burst of searing flames suddenly erupts to obliterate the encroaching black thorns. Kaleo and Samara gaze in stunned silence as the magical inferno violently clears the chaotic battlefield. The dark smoke clears to reveal a bizarre creature, prompting a bewildered gasp of absolute confusion. Shocked by the tiny skull-like entity, Samara learns it is actually the fearsome spirit of the snapdragon. Emerging from the dissipating magic with a glowing staff, Samara's imposing father makes a grand, dramatic entrance. Lord Kaleo stares in utter awe and deep relief at the sudden arrival of His Excellency. Bowing his head in deep shame, Kaleo profusely apologizes for allowing Lady Samara to fall into such perilous danger. Gently lifting his precious daughter into his arms, the Duke anxiously asks if she has suffered any injuries. Profoundly relieved by her safety, the Duke commends Kaleo for keeping Samara completely unharmed during the vicious ambush. The trembling shopkeeper desperately stammers out pathetic excuses, claiming the young lady simply misunderstood his dark business. Furious at his lie about a mere warning, Samara screams that he tried to kill them, prompting the cowardly man to plead ignorance of her noble lineage. With a terrifyingly cold glare, the protective Duke menacingly realizes the shopkeeper intentionally tried to harm his daughter. Casually addressing the terrified merchant, the Duke coldly reveals he also possesses a blackthorn fairy. He unleashes a black goddess of winter and death born alongside him, boasting it is 100 times stronger than the merchant's spirit. Screaming for forgiveness, the doomed shopkeeper is instantly swallowed whole by a massive, violent eruption of dark thorns. Watching the horrifying spectacle unfold, a terrified Samara hesitantly stutters out a question asking if the man just died. Shrugging with utter indifference, the Duke coldly states he left the foolish man's fate entirely to the blackthorn spirit. Sporting a wry smile, Kaleo dryly suggests the vanished shopkeeper is probably wandering lost in some distant forest by now. Spotting the nearby caged creatures, Samara desperately points and begs her father to save the trapped fairies. Without waiting for a proper answer, the determined little girl immediately sprints toward the cruel iron cages. Reminding her father that fairies are considered good neighbors, Samara implores him to treat them with respect and help them. The Duke regretfully explains that because the shop operates with national approval, he cannot legally enforce his territorial laws against them. With a sly and knowing glance, the Duke notes a convenient legal loophole since the shop's owner has now mysteriously gone missing. Because the merchant has no business partners, the Duke officially declares the Lord is obligated to take full custody of the shop's abandoned goods. Smirking as he doubts the owner will ever return, the Duke secures the fairy's freedom as Samara beams with ecstatic joy. A magical lock shatters completely as the cruel binding collar is finally released from a captive fairy's delicate neck. Free at last, a tiny and wide-eyed water fairy child steps forward from the broken remnants of its heavy restraints. Crouching down with a gentle smile, Samara warmly comforts the trembling fairy by assuring it the scary collars are gone forever. Overcome with immense gratitude and relief, the tearful little fairy lunges forward to wrap Samara in a tight, desperate hug. As Kaleo notes the Nyx water spirit has clearly grown attached to Lady Samara, the Duke observes that such spirits naturally tend to like people. Wondering if the poor child has any relatives, Samara is saddened when her father explains that fairies lack the concept of family altogether. Gazing up with large, pleading eyes, Samara eagerly asks her father if they can just take this lonely little fairy home with them. Deciding the spirit would make an excellent playmate for his daughter, the Duke easily agrees to the heartwarming adoption. Walking away happily as a family, Samara notes their yard has a pond and a nearby river, securing a perfect new home for the water spirit. Desperately clutching her father's sleeve, Samara asks if there is really no way to take the lonely water spirit home. With pleading eyes and a heavy heart, she tearfully presses the stern Duke to reconsider his absolute rejection. Sighing deeply, the Duke warns that the harmful mischief of a Nyx often drags favored humans straight into the watery depths. After a tense moment of consideration, he finally concedes that forming a familiar contract would neutralize the danger since the creature adores her. Surprised by the sudden magical suggestion, Samara anxiously asks if she can safely handle a spirit despite possessing barely any magic. The protective Duke gently reassures his anxious daughter that the fairy's incredibly strong affection for her makes the magical contract entirely possible. Staring down at the tiny trembling creature, Samara softly wonders aloud if someone like her is truly worthy of such a profound bond. A heartwarming and unspoken connection sparks rapidly between the noble girl and the enchanted fairy as they prepare to forge an everlasting contract. As the Duke explains that a contract requires magic, blood, and a name, Samara coos excitedly over the ridiculously cute spirit. Deep in thought, the young girl ponders what the absolute perfect name for this precious, magical child should be. A bright smile violently crosses her face as she names the fairy Marin to honor the beautiful seaside town where they first met. Hearing its brand new identity, the ecstatic fairy happily screams Samara's name in a sudden burst of pure joy. Embracing the tiny aquatic creature, Samara gleefully declares that she will proudly be Marin's big sister from now on. Producing a glowing artifact, the Duke hands her a magical pendant forged from crystallized, moonlit spring water to safely house the delicate fairy. Utterly amazed by the beautiful magical vessel, Marin quickly dives right into the glowing crystal with a tiny and excited gasp. The newly named water spirit cheerfully swims inside its wondrous magical home while safely hanging from a golden chain. When Samara expresses disappointment about not holding hands, her father dryly notes that she would be completely soaking wet walking all the way home. Clutching the beautiful crystal pendant tightly to her chest, Samara softly thanks her father for his incredibly generous gift. The noble family quietly rides back to their lavish estate together inside a luxurious, tightly sealed horse-drawn carriage. Noting that Lady Samara has fallen fast asleep, Kaleo prompts the Duke to sigh heavily over her complete lack of natural caution. Watching her rest peacefully against the cushions, Kaleo warmly remarks that she must be completely exhausted after such a wildly eventful day. Breaking the comfortable silence, the brooding Duke softly apologizes for the terrifying and dangerous ambush that unfolded earlier. He grimly admits the Snapdragon's protection was insufficient and reveals the mistletoe spirit had actively warned him of the impending disaster. Kaleo quickly brushes off the heavy apology, vehemently refusing to let His Excellency shoulder all the blame for the violent encounter. Feeling immensely guilty, the loyal knight insists it was his own careless fault for putting the young lady in such a perilous situation. Gently pinching Samara's soft cheek, the Duke fiercely declares he could not have lived with himself if her adorable face had been scarred. He smoothly waves off Kaleo's lingering guilt by assuring the anxious warrior that everything turned out perfectly fine in the end. Boasting absolute alchemical confidence, the Duke states that even if she were injured, his special custom medicine would heal it completely cleanly. His protective obsession violently shines through as he vows he would spend his entire life crafting medicine if the first miraculous batch failed. Shifting his piercing gaze toward the knight, the Duke coldly points out the fresh, untreated injury sustained by Kaleo during the desperate fight. Surprised by the sudden medical attention, Kaleo recoils as the Duke aggressively promises to apply plenty of instantly healing ointment once they return. Sweating nervously at the terrifying prospect, Kaleo dreads the treatment and carefully asks if it involves the specific ointment packed full of stinky herbs. The Duke sharply orders him not to complain about the best healing salve in the world while Kaleo forces out a groan of fake excitement. Time marches steadily forward as 4 peaceful months completely pass since Dee originally returned to the grand halls of Arizalt Manor. Though Dee was strictly supposed to stay for only one night, various unforeseen reasons extended the chaotic visit straight into the bitter heart of winter. Heavy snow softly blankets the frozen ground outside the manor's frosted window as the harsh and unforgiving winter season finally settles in. Inside the warm and crackling study, a massive, overwhelming stack of formal royal invitations catches the group's immediate attention. Noting that Kaleo has already returned to the bustling capital, the Duke realizes they cannot possibly host a grand, sweeping ball at the snowy manor. Staring solemnly out at the relentless snow, the Duke begrudgingly admits he still must travel to formally greet the king for the upcoming new year. With unavoidable royal duties forcefully calling, he finally decides that it is about time for them to pack up and immediately return to the capital. Gazing softly ahead in the quiet room, the Duke contemplates his next serious words carefully. He generously offers Samara a beautifully prepared room in their capital residence so they will never have to live apart. Samara's eyes violently widen in sheer delight at the completely unexpected and life-changing news. Beaming with absolute joy, the ecstatic girl loudly thanks her father for the wonderful and comforting surprise. The Duke dryly remarks that it would be terribly troublesome if she constantly cried every single time he tried to leave. He firmly announces that their carriage will officially depart for the bustling capital in exactly 3 days. Turning his imposing gaze slightly, the Duke commands his ecstatic daughter to immediately begin preparing for their rapid departure. Caught completely off guard by the incredibly tight schedule, Samara loudly gasps in sheer panic at the sudden 3-day deadline. Frantically rushing around her cluttered room, the young noble desperately tries to pack all her scattered magical belongings. Pacing nervously among her packed luggage, Samara anxiously double-checks to ensure she did not accidentally forget anything important. She mentally confirms that all her essential books, precious herb bottles, and refining ores are safely packed away. Clutching a special customized fan book, Samara ensures her most cherished and embarrassing possession is securely hidden from view. Breathing a heavy sigh of relief, the exhausted girl finally declares that her chaotic packing ordeal is completely finished. She effortlessly hoists a heavy, stuffed bag onto her small shoulder with a determined and energetic grunt. Glancing fondly around her quiet bedroom, Samara feels a sudden wave of deep melancholy over leaving her comfortable sanctuary. Whispering a soft and heartfelt farewell to the empty room, she gratefully thanks her peaceful home for everything it has provided so far. The luxurious horse-drawn carriage violently rattles along the bumpy dirt road toward the distant, towering royal capital. Peering curiously out the moving carriage window, Samara eagerly asks her seasoned father what the grand capital is actually like. The Duke calmly explains that while the lively city features many people and tall buildings, it unfortunately holds very few fairies. Processing this deeply unexpected revelation, Samara hums thoughtfully as a wave of sudden concern washes over her. She openly expresses a deep, lingering fear that the severe lack of fairies will leave her feeling lonely and entirely unable to use magic properly. Dismissing her intense worries entirely, the powerful Duke promises to personally train her since her magical power still has immense room to grow. Deeply moved by his unwavering and confident support, Samara beams a bright smile and sincerely thanks her incredible father. Despite studying diligently for 4 rigorous months, Samara frustratedly realizes she still cannot fully harness raw fairy power to cast proper magic. Pondering the strict inheritance of magical power, she begins to deeply suspect her severe limitations stem directly from her complicated, untalented bloodline. The narrative shifts suddenly to reveal that Samara's biological mother, Narnia, was also once an eager apprentice to the legendary mage Dee. A vivid flashback completely unfolds to show a 17-year-old Dee first meeting 16-year-old Narnia at the prestigious Magic Research Institute. Following the strict ancient customs of their country, noble children turning 16 must diligently apprentice for 2 years in their desired professional workplace. Narnia respectfully followed this demanding tradition by apprenticing at the rigorous institute to achieve her lifelong dream of becoming a court magician. During her difficult magical training, she was personally mentored by Dee, an unmatched prodigy who later became a celebrated hero in a massive, brutal war. Before marching off to the bloody battlefield, an intense younger Dee earnestly commanded Narnia to safely wait for his ultimate, victorious return. Staring deeply into her trembling eyes, the powerful mage fiercely swore that he would absolutely come back alive from the terrifying conflict. With unwavering and dominating confidence, Dee boldly demanded that she accept him as her official husband once the destructive war finally ended. Narnia seemingly accepted his passionate feelings, and exactly 1 year later, she miraculously gave birth to a healthy newborn child. However, the infant shockingly possessed hair and eyes of a bizarre, distinct color that could not possibly have come from either parent. A devastated and completely heartbroken Dee stares at his trembling wife in absolute, soul-crushing disbelief as the dark truth dawns on him. Heavy tears stream violently down Narnia's pale, frightened face as the crushing weight of her hidden betrayal finally comes completely to light. Weeping bitterly, the terrified woman desperately apologizes to Dee while confessing she had actually always been deeply afraid of his overwhelming, monstrous power. Narnia tragically reveals she had always truly loved her childhood friend, but Dee had aggressively expressed his absolute love before she could ever confess her true feelings. Being only a completely normal magician, the hopelessly intimidated Narnia felt utterly incapable of refusing a forceful marriage proposal from the entire continent's greatest mage. Pressured heavily by the sudden marriage proposal, Narnia completely abandons her duties to desperately connect with her true childhood love. Despite becoming the celebrated wife of the continent's greatest hero, her profound unhappiness fuels a forbidden romantic fire that tragically results in conceiving another man's child. Pleading with intense desperation, her secret lover begs Narnia to throw absolutely everything away and recklessly run away with him. Embracing the dangerous and forbidden path, she completely abandons her entire aristocratic life. Fleeing her terrifyingly powerful husband, Narnia selfishly grasps at her own twisted version of true happiness. Reflecting on the grim history, Samara bitterly concludes her mother is the absolute worst for throwing an innocent husband and child into the deepest depths of misery. Staring intently at her imposing father, she silently wonders if Dee actually minds her constant presence or simply remembers the treacherous Narnia through her face. Dee meets her anxious gaze with a heavy, unreadable silence that fills the tense carriage. Remembering the dark game scenario where a demon kills her, Samara grimly realizes that a truly loving father would have easily saved her from such a brutal fate. Hesitantly breaking the heavy silence, the anxious girl asks her father if he is truly okay with personally teaching her magic. She nervously admits her magical power remains pitifully low and laments that the stubborn fairies rarely ever lend their crucial strength to her. Scoffing at her foolish doubts, Dee sharply demands to know if she thinks he is an incompetent fool who would ever teach an apprentice unwillingly. Intimidated by his sudden fierce intensity, Samara instantly stammers out a quick, nervous apology. Commanding her to stand tall, the formidable mage firmly orders her to possess true confidence as the proud daughter of the continent's absolute greatest magic user. Surprised by his completely uncharacteristic warmth, Samara lets out a soft, genuine laugh that immediately catches Dee off guard. Staring at her bright smile, the brooding Duke softly remarks that his peculiar daughter is truly quite unusual. Arriving at a massive port, Dee dramatically announces they will leave all attendants behind and travel completely alone by ship for the rest of their journey. A breathtaking magical vessel violently materializes before their very eyes as it proudly docks at the edge of the sparkling water. Raising his glowing magical staff high into the air, the powerful Duke prepares to cast an overwhelmingly massive spell. Invoking the ancient mage's supreme authority, Dee powerfully commands the very elements to fiercely bend to his absolute will. He aggressively orders the winding path to split wide open for the Western Queen, instantly destroying all surrounding chaos to safely deliver them to the distant land. The tremendous magical energy violently erupts, instantly propelling the colossal ship forward across the shimmering ocean waves. Startled by the sudden commotion, Samara wildly gasps as bizarre water spirits with tiny fish legs eagerly pop up to join their grand voyage. Unfazed by the chaotic magical creatures, Dee calmly instructs his frantic daughter to just let the excited fairies go. Dozens of vibrant water spirits happily gather around the massive hull, completely thrilled by the ship's overwhelming magical aura. Diving joyfully off the deck, little Marin cheerfully promises to return soon as she excitedly plunges into the deep blue sea. Reassuring his worried daughter, Dee explains that a contracted familiar cannot physically wander far without its master's explicit permission. Eagerly exploring the grand ship's luxurious interior, Samara quickly locates a beautifully furnished kitchen space. She marvels at the surprisingly comfortable bedroom but immediately begins to panic when she cannot find a bathroom or a toilet anywhere. Realizing there is absolutely no food stocked aboard either, a deeply confused Samara calls out to question her powerful father. Dee casually dismisses her urgent questions by stating that a toilet is entirely unnecessary on this magical journey. Sweating nervously, the desperate young girl wonders if handsome men simply not needing toilets is a bizarre reality since she definitely still requires one. Without any warning, Dee instantly casts a powerful sleeping spell on her, casually noting he will simply wake her in 3 days when they finally reach the capital. Completely incapacitated by the overwhelming magic, Samara falls into a deep, uninterrupted slumber for the entirety of the long voyage. Although slightly sulky that her childish desire for a fun two-person trip was entirely ignored, she violently wakes up to a truly breathtaking sight. Staring in absolute awe at the towering architecture, the wide-eyed girl marvels at the sheer size of her father's grand capital mansion. Noticing her distant admiration, Dee gently corrects her by warmly insisting that this magnificent estate is officially her home too. Deeply moved by his sweet and inclusive words, Samara giggles happily as she fully embraces her luxurious new life. Throwing the heavy bedroom doors wide open, she loudly gasps in complete amazement at the extravagant room waiting inside. Overjoyed by the beautiful decor, Samara excitedly screams that her brand new room is unbelievably cute. Asking if she likes the beautifully decorated room, Dee watches as Samara eagerly replies that she loves it very much. Relieved by her radiant joy, the Duke warmly states that her happiness is all that matters as she brightly thanks him. Looking around the thoughtfully designed space, Samara silently wonders if her imposing father personally handpicked the cute interior just for her. Turning to leave the vibrant room, Dee instructs his daughter that they will visit the Prius Magic Research Institute after she rests. Arriving at the Grand Institute, a massive crowd of eager researchers excitedly welcomes their esteemed director back to the capital. Overwhelmed by the enormous and highly respectful reception, Samara marvels at her father's undeniable status as the highest magical authority. Noticing the hushed murmurs from the gathered crowd, Samara shrinks in deep embarrassment knowing everyone realizes she is not his biological daughter. Ignoring the staring crowds entirely, Dee leads her down a quiet hallway and firmly pushes open the heavy door to his personal office. A chaotic swarm of excited fairies immediately erupts in joyous cheers upon realizing Dee has finally returned with a small girl. Swarming around the bewildered noble, the tiny spirits happily praise her sunset-colored hair and beautifully pleasant magical aura. Utterly amazed by the dazzling sight, a wide-eyed Samara gasps at the sheer number of vibrant fairies thriving inside the bustling capital. She stares in absolute wonder at the lush, magically enchanted office overflowing with vibrant greenery and sparkling fairy light. Taking in the soothing atmosphere, she notices the room regularly burns fairy-favored scents and safely lights warm candles for their absolute comfort. Spotting a dedicated fairy altar in the corner, Samara realizes such a grand structure is entirely unnecessary for a mage with abundant magic. Smiling warmly at the thoughtful setup, she finally understands exactly why the powerful Duke is so deeply loved by the elemental spirits. Chattering excitedly among themselves, the cheerful fairies reveal they already heard all about her from the distant spirits residing in Aryan province. Circling her head playfully, the tiny creatures happily identify her as Dee's beloved daughter with distinct sunset-colored hair and light green eyes. Although noting her magical signature completely differs from his, the welcoming spirits eagerly embrace the young girl and excitedly ask for her name. Introducing herself with a polite and gentle smile, the young noble softly tells the gathered fairies that her name is Samara. Erupting into a brilliant shower of sparkling light, the ecstatic fairies joyfully bestow their magical blessings upon the ancient mage's beloved daughter. Overwhelmed by their radiant and heartwarming acceptance, Samara completely beams with joy and gratefully thanks the glowing spirits. Standing quietly by the heavy wooden door, the imposing Duke silently watches his daughter happily mingle with the countless magical creatures. Offering a rare and gentle smirk, Dee softly remarks that she will seemingly get along incredibly well with his magical companions. Turning to face her supportive father, a beaming Samara enthusiastically agrees while completely surrounded by her new fluttering friends. Suddenly, a chilling and ominous silence violently sweeps through the lively room as heavy footsteps menacingly approach the office door. Sensing a terrifying presence drawing near, the once cheerful fairies instantly freeze in absolute, trembling terror. Without a single moment of hesitation, the entire swarm of magical spirits violently scatters and vanishes completely into thin air. Left standing entirely alone in the sudden emptiness, a deeply shocked Samara gasps as she wonders why the fairies disappeared in an instant.